I think we have to be careful of the language we use without fully understanding what it means, or saying things that we're doing and then not actually doing it in practice.
Welcome to the Liverpool FA podcast. Our aim is to provide regular insight from a variety of experts to help you in your own football journey. We'll do it through interviews, roundtable discussions, and by linking to other resources to help support you. For more information about each episode, just tap the album art, which will provide you with more about our guests and links to further content.
Our guest today is Mark Partington. Mark is a senior lecturer in sports coaching at Edge Hill University and is also a coach in the academy system. Mark and I recorded this back in June and we discussed the research he's been involved in, which includes topics such as coach behaviours, questioning, reflection and providing a clear rationale for choices made when coaching. It was really refreshing to speak to somebody who had a critical view on these subjects, and also the phrase coaching philosophy, which is something we've discussed at length with previous guests. We think this episode will be relevant to you, particularly if you're interested in the theory that underpins practice, and especially if you're a university student studying sports coaching. If you want to connect with Mark, you can find him on Twitter at Coach Partington, and for a list of all the papers and resources we discussed, just see the show notes. One last thing, we're currently putting together our CPD programme at Liverpool FA for 2018, so if you're a coach in the local area looking to get involved in any of our events, we're really keen to know what sort of themes you'd like to explore or what problems you encounter in your own coaching that you'd like support with. So let us know by getting in touch via Twitter or emailing wayne.wardle@liverpoolfa.com. Wayne leads on all things coach development at Liverpool FA. So that's all the updates for now. We hope you enjoy this one with Mark Partington. Apologies for the audio quality. It sounds like we're both locked in a bathroom cubicle, but it was just a room with an echo. Welcome to the podcast. Great to have you along.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.
We first met 2-3 weeks ago now. Yeah. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, what your kind of day job is, what your involvement in coaching with is, and then we'll crack on from there.
Okay. Currently a lecturer at Edge Hill University and a part-time football coach within the academy for 10 to 11 years, working across the age groups, currently working with the under-13s. Edge Hill, I've been there now 6-7 years, something like that, so 7 years. And my main role's there delivering on sports coaching modules, linking sort of the theory to practice, and something I suppose I'm quite passionate about as well. I like to think I'm quite applied in what I do, so hence why I'm still coaching within the football academy.
And how did you get into that? What was your route in?
So I did my degree at university in sports coaching. And from that, there was an opportunity to arise to do some voluntary work in my final year undergraduate degree.
Which university were you at?
Edge Hill as well. So graduate from Edge Hill. And there was an opportunity to do some performance analysis within the youth team and little bits with the first team. Took that opportunity, really enjoyed it, learnt loads from doing the job. And luckily from that, a job came about. Was coaching in the academy, doing some performance analysis and being like a teacher with the youth team, basically teaching them the BTEC diploma for the Premier League. So I had them sort of 3 roles to start off with after I finished my undergrad, and from there I've always been within the academy. I did 2 years of that, moved to Edge Hill as a lecturer. Alongside that, I suppose I've done my masters as well in sports coaching at Loughborough University, with a Christopher Cushion there, which I found very, very useful and learnt loads and was great for my coaching practice. And I'm currently carrying out a PhD at Loughborough as well.
And what's the PhD in?
It's in coaching philosophy. So it started looking at coaching philosophy and what that looks like in a football academy. And it's sort of progressed over the 5 years to something a bit different, really. But yeah, trying to basically an ethnography approach, so observations, interviews, document analysis over a longitudinal period of a season and a half within one football academy.
So how long have you got left on that now?
I'm hoping to finish by the end of this year,
Yeah.
touch wood. So I'm just in the writing phase, which is fun, shall we say.
So then I will be able to call you Dr. Mark, is that right?
Well, you can do, yeah.
Great stuff. So I really wanted to get you on the show to have you talk about your work. I've read most of most of what you've published anyway, and like you said, you're an applied coach, or you like to try and apply your research into practice, which is fantastic. And I think what the listeners will hopefully find interesting is your work today, what you've found, and what are the implications, and maybe advice that you can give coaches off the back of your own studies. So let's get into that now. So talk us through some of your earlier work, and we'll go from there.
Well, I suppose in terms of as a practitioner, as a coach within the football academy, I've always been interested in what coaches do and how they do it, but probably more importantly, trying to understand why. And it's always been something that's interested me. Certainly over the 10 years I've coached, how I do things has changed, but then also my thinking underpinning that and why. And I suppose that's come from sort of my education, but also experience within the academy, and I'm always learning, always trying to improve my coaching. So I suppose in terms of my research, it started off looking at coaches' behaviour and understanding what and how they implement their practice and their behaviours, so how they communicate to players, what kind of practice activities they set up. That was all quite interesting for me. We used a systematic observation tool Christopher Cushion designed, which is called a coach analysis intervention system.
Yeah, I remember going to the launch day at that at Loughborough. Actually, it would have been about 2012, 2013, something like that. Yeah.
So I've used that system, and basically, and Chris would say similar. He says, well, he uses this term. It's a sort of a front porch approach. So it's there to sort of access the hows and whys. But what's really important for me, and Chris will say the same, is to understand why the coaches do what they do. So we use the systematic observation, we use the numbers that we get from the coach behaviour data to start discussions, I would say, with coaches. So we would show them that data, and it's a good way to just start discussions about their coaching based on some objective sort of some numbers that are there.
Yeah.
Where I found in the past, if we just suddenly start talking about coaching, we've not really got a point to hold on to, and as some of my research suggests, and I would say from my own coaching, generally we have poor self-awareness. It's very difficult to sort of articulate and understand everything that's happened in practice. So therefore, we use the coach behaviour, we observe, we look at what coaches do, and then we sort of ask them and interview them and understand, well, why do we use this in this situation, and what's your understanding of that?
Tell me a bit more about the data that you collect, or you collected in this work then. So what are you actually collecting on the coaches? You mentioned that front porch. What's in that porch?
So basically we started off with 12 coaches, and we filmed coaches in their practice, and we filmed them 3 or more times to identify what they're doing. And I suppose that front porch is the actual behaviours, so things like instruction, questioning, type of feedback, whether they're positive, whether they're negative, types of silence that they might use.
Types of silence?
So there was a study back, Smith and Cushion 2006, that talked about the use of silence, and that silence can be quite a positive behaviour to use for coaching.
What and why is that?
To let players sort of think and understand and do for themselves, instead of us as coaches always constantly talking at them. We give them time to think, and they label silence as 2 things: on task and off task. Off task silence is basically, well, we're not very interested in the practice, and maybe we're talking, which is fine at times, we're talking to assistants, or we're doing something other than observing practice. Where on task silence is basically, it's a behaviour that we've implemented. We're using silence for learning purposes, and we might be carefully observing the practice and the players in our session to plan our spots, I suppose, our next move or our next intervention. And silence on task is a really good, important tool that we could use. So that'd be one of the behaviours that we looked at.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that. I've been filming lots of coaches over the last few years since technology has become more available and more easily accessed. And one of the things, or one of the metrics, if you like, that I've been feeding back to coaches if they've asked for it is, during the session, longest period of silence. So when I've gone back through their video clips, it's quite easy to see on the kind of sound wave bar, if you like, where those silences are. And I think over a period of maybe 6 months, probably about half a dozen or more coaches that I'd worked with, the longest period of silence I think was about 45 seconds in an hour session. I don't know if that marries up with any of the findings that you discovered.
Yeah, we sort of found that, I suppose from when we were talking to coaches about what they wanted in their practice, they were surprised how little silence they used. And when we looked in more depths and looked at some of the videos of their coaching, is that some of the things they are saying or some of the behaviours we're using, they don't realise how much they actually are talking. And if you think, I know it's been said a few times, but if you think about a player playing within a training session, you're constantly barking information at him. Is he actually going to process that information? Is he actually going to learn? Is he actually taking that information on board? Is that actually helping him there in the moment make decisions and play the game? I suppose we would argue it would not. So silence is quite a nice behaviour to use and important. And I think when we discussed and looked at the videos and showed the numbers to coaches, and I've done it myself, I've observed myself coach and systematically observed my coaching, and I was surprised. I wanted to argue that I was a coach who asked questions, and when I look back at the systematic observation, I was far from it. A lot more instructions, a lot more command than I wanted within my coaching. So it's quite a good tool in terms of getting to, well, okay, yes, we have poor self-awareness, understanding what we're doing in coaching, and then making changes from that, instead of just saying, well, yeah, I want to ask more questions, and not actually applying that to the practice that you're actually doing.
So what were the next steps then, once you've given the coaches their feedback? And I know from experience of watching my own sessions that first time you watch yourself back, that can be quite a raw moment, because you've got this kind of idea and image and vision of how you are as a coach, and then you perhaps, certainly with me, and it sounds like with yourself, you didn't realise that there was this big blind spot. And there's no argument with it. It's it's black and white in front of you. So
yeah, it's tough, and some take it better than others. But if you're open to the process, and I think the people who were involved in our research had the option to be involved or not, and could pull out at any time. And those that were open we wanted to improve and wanted to learn and wanted to get better. So it was a great realisation tool for them. And I suppose I was mean in the first instance to sort of just ask them what behaviours they used. I showed them the definitions. Okay, what kind of behaviours did you use? What did you do? What do you do when you coach? And then showed them the information we collected. Then showed them some of the videos. And yeah, it is. And I've done it to myself. It is a little bit daunting. You're like, oh, geez, I didn't quite think I was doing that, and you're a little bit gutted. But then once you realise that, and you feel empowered in a way that, okay, I can make some changes here. I've seen this now, and I can make these changes, and I can do more of what I want to do.
So what was the next steps then? Once you'd collected the data, you'd given the coaches the feedback and shown them the footage. This is a kind of, if to use that analogy again, the front porch of your behaviours. Where did you take it from there, and what was some of the impact?
Yeah, I suppose we've said feedback. It wasn't really used for feedback. It was used to understand why coaches do what they do. So it was sort of an accidental intervention, really. So from there, we just discussed and we talked about why they did what they do, and from what the coaches were saying, I sort of built on what they said, or got them to explore and discuss more about why they did what they did. And that was the initial sort of research process. Then it sort of moved to, after a sit down and a bit of a think, and moved to sort of, well, let's go back in. So a year later, these 12 coaches got whittled down to sort of 5, because there were only 5 left in the actual academy. But these 5 coaches we observed them again, did exactly the same process, filmed them, systematic observation, so counted the behaviours, if you like, and then went through the process again. But at the end of the sort of interview process, we sort of asked them why there might have been changes in the behaviour. Not everyone changed massively, but as a collective group, they did improve and change some of the behaviours. And we linked that to this sort of accidental intervention, the reflective conversations that we were having, the new youth awards that they were involved in. The coaches explained that was useful and changed the way they thought about their coaching and the way they actually coached. And also CPD within the context. So we were very lucky to have coach educators to come in and deliver sort of in-house education, which we found very useful, or the coaches highlighted as very useful. So that was where the research project, if you like, sort of advanced, and this turned into sort of a accidental intervention, if you like, in terms of changing coach behaviour, because we were in no illusion that coach behaviour is very difficult to change. What we do as coaches is very, very difficult, because it goes back on a number of years of experience and beliefs, and it's embedded, and it's tricky to change.
Yeah, and those coach behaviours, to what extent are they linked back to the experiences that you might have as a player? I think back to my own behaviours as a novice coach when I first started out. I felt very much like, well, I'll just do what I experienced as a player. Is that anything that you've found in your own work?
Yeah, definitely. And when we speak to coaches, it's, I don't want to use the word easy, but it is easy to use what you've always used to in practice. For myself, I remember doing my level 2 and doing the 2v2 defending drill. Right. And I love taking that practice. It's the practice I got assessed on. It's the one I did the most. And when I first started in the academy, that's a practice I used nearly every week. Yeah,
I remember I was a student myself at Loughborough back in 2002. I did my level 2 on campus. Fortunately, we were given a subsidised course throughout, which meant early Saturday morning, so obviously early to bed on Friday night. And my assessment topic was the low-driven pass. Right. I can remember going out with my flatmates from the hall for hours on end practicing my low-driven pass, so that when it came to my assessment, I was able to demonstrate it. Mm-hmm. Those who were playing with us on the A licence yesterday would beg to differ that it had any effect.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's not surprising that, like, the impact culture as tradition, what we've always done in the past, it's not surprising that it has a real grip of what we do as coaches. I think that really bugs me, does really bug me in some ways, and culture, tradition annoy me, and how it's got a grasp of us as coaches. And I think it's important that we challenge that and critical, and I think some of this research started to do that, and getting to understand why we do what we do is important. So, for example, that 2v2 defending, why am I doing it? Do the players actually need it? Or have they said to me they need it? Or however I want to go about in that route. Or is it because I'm using it because it's the best that I'm at as a coach, or it's the best practice I deliver as a coach? And I'll be honest, 10 years ago, I was doing it because it made me look good. Yeah. I was walking into a brand new football academy, and I felt that made me look good, and that's why I was using it, which for me is completely wrong. But I think that's the problem as well, some of the barriers that we have to face when we're coaching, like the context around us and presentation of self to others.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of avenues I want to explore there. The first being, that was 11 years ago. What have been the biggest changes in your own coaching practice since then?
I think for me, focusing on this sort of rationalising what I do and why I do what I do, and my masters really helped me, starting to firstly highlight what I do, and then starting to understand then why, and sort of linking some theoretical frameworks to why I do what I do. So it was like, for example, I'm getting told that questioning is really, really good, or we should be doing questioning. Why should we be doing questioning? And then understanding why I should be questioning then allowed me to make a choice when I used it. And it wasn't a case I was just using it because I've heard it's good to use. I was using it based on the individuals that I felt needed it. The same with command and instruction. I understood when to use that and when to use questions. So I think masters in the theory side and the frameworks although there's not one size fits all and there's not one answer to everything, it certainly helped me to start to think about why I do what I do, and rationalise what I do. And I'll be honest, at times I've come off and it's been the worst session, and I've looked back and I've gone, well, I've just used instruction all the way through, I've just used command, and it's allowed me to highlight, well, okay, you've used that, therefore how am I going to change that and what am I going to do? I believe in this type of coaching, I believe in this type of learning, this is the way I want to behave. And for me it helps with my reflections and just developed, because we are learning a lot from experience, and research suggests that experiential learning has a real impact on us. So if we're able to reflect and learn from them experience instead of just regurgitating the same stuff over and over again, I found that really useful. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. And we were having a discussion beforehand about the different coach behaviours and almost, I suppose, avoiding the stigma that may be attached with certain behaviours. So command being one, I think a lot of the kind of popular opinion out there is that good and bad, one style is good, one style is bad, and I think we're trying to escape that, and it's just recognising what you get and maybe what you don't get and what you sacrifice by using different approaches.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. Like we said before, I think there's definitely been a shift from when I started coaching 10 years ago, from command style to more question-based and more game-based activities. But there's no real strong empirical evidence out there that suggests that's the right way to move. In my opinion and what I've seen, we might do it for other reasons, motivational levels of players, their involvement, their enjoyment. But in terms of actual learning, there's nothing really that we can really grasp hold of. But there's been that massive shift. And I think it's like we've just said there, it's about understanding the spectrum, if you like, and not always sitting in one or the other, but making the decisions on using, if we're talking command, question, answer, guide, discovery, we make that decision based on the players, and even more importantly for me now, the individual players, which is tough, really tough. And you've really got to know them, and it's very difficult, but I think that's the level that we go for. So we don't just sit at one side of the spectrum, we move through the spectrum. And I think, well, we were saying before, weren't we, about lots of times I've pulled players out of sessions and I've started questioning them and asking them about the practice, and they're just looking at me just saying, just flipping tell me the answer. I don't want to know. And actually in that time, it is the right time to tell them, and then they get back in the practice and away they go. Yeah. But I think sometimes we get bogged down, well, we need to question and we have to now do game-based approach. I think we just need to be careful and take a step back there and probably move more across the spectrum as such.
So how does this play out now in your own coaching then? So you're more aware of this. What's the sort of process that you go through maybe when you're planning, delivering, and then starting to review your own practice with the 13s that you coach?
Yeah, well, I suppose I've got a massive cop-out, and it is a massive cop-out, where I sort of get given my sessions due to the EPPP. We have some flexibility, but we actually get given the session plans and the sessions we deliver. The session designs and the practices that it gives us are spot on and great for the kids. The kids absolutely love them, and we have chats a lot about how we can change them and etc. So the cop-out is that I sort of get given them sessions.
So the what is taken care of to an extent? To
an extent, my behaviours is obviously, I choose my behaviours at the end of the day.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's the one thing we have control of, isn't it? What we say to the kids.
Yeah. So is that something that is planned beforehand, is completely reactionary, or does it sit somewhere in between?
It sits somewhere in between. So I always have sort of questions. So I'll get sent the session plan. I can access the session plan days before, and I'll look at the sort of coaching points within that and the learning objectives of that session.
And are those objectives, how are they based upon the group? Is it upon an individual? How do they look? Individuals
and group. And usually what I try and do is, because it's tricky, if I'm honest, to do all the individual stuff, is I look at the group stuff and then I pick out some of the individuals. And what we've started doing now is doing a lot more individual coaching before the session actually begins. So the kids get there early, they're doing their physical warm-up, which is important, and then we have a time period of sort of 10 minutes where we'll pull individuals out and we'll work with them in an isolated practice. working on their individual learning objectives that have been set by the head of phase.
Okay.
So we're doing a lot more of that.
Yeah.
But I suppose going back to sort of the behaviours that I use, a lot of it is reactive, and you have to be reactive. But a lot of stuff you can plan. I think on coaching sessions we plan a lot of the X and O's, and we do all that, and that's great. It looks pretty, but we sort of know that stuff, and we don't actually know what questions we can ask. And for me, that is the trickiest bit, and it is a real skill. It takes a lot of practice, but it'd help if you write them down. So for me, everyone's different, but for me, I have a little piece of paper with questions written down based on the coaching objectives, and I'll pull that out and I'll use that within my session. I'll just read the question at times, and as you can probably guess from the podcast, is that I ramble on a bit, and it helps me. Writing down the question does help me, and it helps me to articulate clearly and get to the point. And but a lot of the other stuff is reactive, and I suppose what I've moved some ways in terms of my coaching is, and we discussed it before, but understanding why I go in. So I see what I feel a mistake, or like something's gone well, and whatever we praise that with feedback or whatever we do. But for the example, let's say if I see something going wrong, if I see that go wrong, I go in, or I pull the individual out, and in the past what I've done is started to just question or talk or command or whatever based on what I feel has gone wrong there. And sometimes that's not always the case, and we talked before about maybe I've gone in thinking it's someone's first touch, so we maybe talk about that, where actually if I ask them and start talking, well, what happened there, what do you feel, why did that not quite go as planned, it's a completely different reason. Like, it might be their approach to the ball, or it might be their start position, or whatever that is. And that's something I found out recently, is that what I see as a coach isn't always what's happened to the player through the player's eyes.
I found this a similar thing just working with coaches over the years, whereas previously a coach might have delivered a practice, and then when the practice is finished, I've then jumped straight in with my feedback, and I haven't actually got the thoughts of the coach. So by flipping that on its head and go, well, tell me what was going through your head, why did you do X, Y or Z, that can lead to a more developmental conversation. That's what I found in practice working with coaches, and I suppose a similar thing applies with players, would you say?
Yeah, it's interesting, and we all see things differently, and sometimes it's understanding the other person's point of view.
Yeah. So how is that, what have been some of the success stories that you've had with this kind of change in approach to your own coaching then?
I suppose just being able to, I hope I've sort of increased my awareness of what I do. And I think when I first started, I was a bit like a rabbit in headlights, and it was like, I'm chucking out this language and I'm saying this, and I might be saying things and doing things because I think it looks good and I feel I have to keep my job, maybe. Where now I sort of, maybe it is because I'm comfortable in the setting, because I've been in the same setting for 10 years and I understand that, but I sort of sit back a little bit more, and I try and make more rationalised decisions based on what's going on in front of me. And sometimes I do miss things, or I see it and I don't react quick enough, but I might just have a chat at the end of the session if it's not right there and then. Where in the past I'd suddenly stop the whole session and go in, and you know what I mean, and so it's been a bit more sort of, a bit more thinking, I suppose, thinking about what I do, when I do it, and why I do it.
And actually thinking it in the moment, in the present.
Yeah. And it's tough. I think that's why we all enjoy it, coaching, because it's not easy. It could be easy, couldn't it? We could just stop sessions, tell them what we think, get back out, and that's it. And but we all understand that now that that's not great for the players all the time. It's not.
No, and I remember the phrase "let the game be the teacher" was quite common, and it actually used to be in our level 1 course years ago, and that almost became a mantra for, well, all I've got to do is get the what right and everything else will look after itself. I think it's a little bit more than that.
Yeah, definitely. And when we were talking before about when you're in practice and I might see an ex-professional who's played for England do something, I might suddenly go, well, I'm going to do that. But we don't really know why he's done that, and we don't really know like the decisions he's made and the thought process has led up to that, and what he's just done there might not work for our players, my under 13s. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think we have to be careful. And it comes back, and lots of people have discussed it before. We watch Premiership football on the Saturday, and the managers are shouting at the players, and that's what they might need at that particular time. But for us to take that back to, I don't know, in my context, under 13s players on a Sunday where they're trying to develop and learn, I'm not always sure that's the best practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Second follow-up question to your work on coach behaviours was, and I've been trying to do this with some of the coaches I've been working with, is almost to quantify those behaviours, but I'm personally finding it quite difficult with some. So how difficult was it to quantify some of these behaviours that you were analysing with the coaches in your work?
This is, I suppose, where the coach analysis intervention system came in, and that's a validated, reliable tool with clear definitions that you can follow. So that helped us in our thinking. Sometimes maybe even just writing some of the behaviours, or whatever you want to call them, instruction, questioning, whatever they are, whatever's important to you, and maybe writing down your definition of them and what they mean to you, and having that understanding helps you then sort of identify them from the video back. And sometimes it's as simple as just tallying, just a simple tick every time you see that. Another way as well is timing. The coach analysis intervention system does this all for you, but you could use a stopwatch as well and time how long your interventions are, time how long you use instruction, questioning, and doing it live is very tricky. But from a video, obviously you can stop and pause it as you go on. It takes us a very long time to analyse, like one coaching session, an hour and a half. It'll take us a long time. Yeah. And that's because we're stopping and we're coding and we're putting the stuff in.
Yeah, you remind me of, I took the under 7s at our club a few years ago, and we had 21 boys in one side of a sports hall. There were three coaches, so we used to have 3 groups of 7 each week, and we would just rotate round. So there was a little bit of movement between practices, but it would give us a kind of much lower coach to player ratio, and that would take up maybe half of the hour that we had with them. So that hour a week, we had to be really efficient with time and the way that we work with the kids. And we had the idea, I think halfway through the year, of how can we use the parents better. And all we did was ask one of the dads, do us a favour, you're going to be watching your son anyway, because at that age they're all really engrossed in their little DNA that's running around the sports hall. So we said, just do us a favour, take a stopwatch or take your phone and get the stopwatch out, and just start the watch when your son isn't active, and stop it when he is. So and what we did is over a number of weeks, we would then collate that time and use that as a basis of, well, how efficient, if you like, have we been tonight in the way that we've managed the session between the 3 of us as coaches. And the first week, I'm ashamed to say, was 20 minutes. So in an hour session, a third of that session, this 6-year-old boy was inactive, which stung. But what we did was that over a number of weeks, I think within about 4 weeks, we'd managed to cut that in half. Mm-hmm. So by a month later, we'd narrowed that down to 10 minutes and an hour of inactive time, if you like. Yeah. So that was just one way that we tried to use a systematic approach, I suppose, in changing our own coach behaviours, and it really did sharpen up and make us think about how can we plan better, how can we transition between practices more efficiently, how can we manage the whole hour to have a positive impact on learning.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's amazing what you don't see, isn't it, really?
Oh, yeah.
I found that with my own coaching, definitely. Using just the video is a good start, and then if you want to systematic brilliant. If you want to start getting some numbers in there, and Yeah, great. I found it really useful anyway, and it's been good for our research. It's interesting that you say that as well, the inactivity, with the research that we've done with Ed Cope and Stephen Harvey and Chris Cushion. We're at similar levels when we've observed coaches in different sports as well, but in football around a third of inactivity, and we're talking like drinks breaks and stuff like that, which is great, they need them, but they're doing nothing. And we've sort of started in the academy, and especially, is that during drinks breaks they might have a little task to do, you know what I mean, we might ask them a little question, or we plan the drinks, we plan the breaks when they are going to be, and give them something to do, an activity based on the session. And it's very easy now for us in the academy to use the tactics board, so we might have a different scenario set up, and we might say, okay, if we're working on defending, your team's 2-0 down, what are you going to do now, and get them into small little groups discussion. It's certainly where I sit. I strongly believe in like construction between like the reflective conversation, construction between people to help with learning and develop. I strongly believe in that. So I try and set that up as much as I can. People talking, and not necessarily always me, but players talking together.
It's interesting you bring up the drinks breaks, and I'll hold my hands up. I've been guilty of, in the past, I can hand on heart say that I've used drinks breaks tactically to give myself a rest and to set up the next practice.
Yeah.
The assumption is as well that, right, all you 16 obviously need a drink as you pour the water. all you 16 obviously need a drink at this moment in time and need hydrating. And I've started to, in my own practice, probably because of the constraints of the time that we have with our players, is, okay, there's your drinks. We're starting the session now, and you know when the session's finishing. If you need a drink and when you need a drink, go and get one.
Nice.
But we're not going to stop you as a group and tell you that you all must have a drink at this moment.
Nice. Okay.
Just trying to reframe the way that we look at it, and that actually has had a significant impact. We're in June now, and I was out with the boys last night, and one of them said, "Yeah, can we have a drinks break? Because a few of us need a drink." Yeah, okay, that's fine. But at least it's coming from them and not me telling them that you need a drink.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think that's certainly the shift in coaching into it, that we're trying to obviously give them more ownership and X, Y, and Z. I think it's great.
Great. So, if I'm a coach listening to this, what might be some, or if a coach wanted to become more aware of their own coaching behaviours, where would you guide them to start?
In sort of understanding their awareness of practice.
Yeah.
Well, I know yourself, you've done a video, haven't you, of how you can use your mobile phone and your speak. I think that's great, and something that's the good thing about technology nowadays, is that we're advanced. A lot of people have technology that they can use quite easily, and using your phone and filming yourself coach, or asking one of the parents to film you, using the microphone. You don't always have to film. You could just record what you say, and I think just listening back to that. And I've got to admit, I do my reflections now, and I'll speak to yourself in the car on the way home, because time is tricky. It's very tricky, and on the way home, instead of listening to the radio, just listening back to what I did in my coaching has sort of helped. And then I suppose the next step, I think that's a great step for me. That was an initial great step, starting to look back. But then if you could take it probably to the next step and start having conversations about that with someone else, that's good as well. Depending who that person is, it might not want to be Tony from the pub, but someone who coaches as well, and start having discussions about that would be really useful, and starts to sort of firstly highlight what and how we do in practice, and that next step of the recording, the video, etc., sort of then gets you to start thinking about the why. And for me, that's the important stuff. And if you start looking at stuff and what and how, and you don't really know why you did it, maybe there's some questions to be asked there, maybe.
I think that's been a real success of the mentor scheme that we've got out there now. We have 300 part-time mentors who are contracted to 100 hours out in the community, where coaches can build that trust and rapport with that critical friend and start to have these conversations. And the feedback that we're getting from the coaches who are involved in this program is, as you'd imagine, quite powerful.
Yeah, sure. I like that language as well. Critical friend. That's how we should see them, really. Yeah, definitely. There's no point getting someone who's just going to tell you X, Y, and Z, and it's not really going to be much benefit. You've got to choose that person wisely. That person has to be someone who you respect, but also you can have a good chat with.
Yeah. I want to shift on a little bit and delve into a bit more of your work, if that's all right, Mark.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, talk us through where your work led next. I think there was something around a paper I'd read around questioning.
Yeah, so I suppose from this coach behaviour stuff and a lot of analysing the videos and looking at the data and the interviews, again working with good colleagues like Ed Cope and Stephen Harvey and Chris Cushion, we started to look at questioning in a bit more depth, and we sort of started to listen to the questions. And what's really great with the system that we use in the coach analysis intervention system is that we can look at just questioning, so we can split that up and we look at all the questioning that these coaches are used. And we started looking at that and watching it, and we started to make some sort of analysis and start to jot down some of our thoughts about coaches' questions. And then we thought what we thought would be a good step would then to type out these questions and had them down all transcribed, and we started to then look at them in a bit more detail. And we started to sort of think of some things about questioning, and we sort of found that I suppose the idea of questioning is to get people to think and get them to, I suppose we're doing it for learning purposes.
So the question is for the recipient rather than the sender?
Yeah, so instead of we could just use instruction and just tell them, but questioning is a process where we want to be sort of getting them to think about what they're doing, and it's good for learning, apparently. So, and what we were actually finding with the questions was that, well, I suppose the first thing is that we didn't really give players time to think, and time is really, really important, and thinking requires time. So coaches would ask questions and then immediately expect an answer, and if we're immediately expecting an answer, it's probably more likely to be just a recall and memory instead of actual learning, which is fine in some cases, but we feel we want to test players more and get them to think about and develop, and so that was one sort of thing that we come up with, and that we weren't giving enough thinking time.
How much do you think that we should take into or bear in mind the context in which the question's asked? So we're sat here in a room at Lancashire FA, it's a nice calm day, we can have a comfortable conversation, ask each other questions, but when we're coaching, the players that we're asking the questions to, their heart rate might be 180 BPM and they're involved in a high tempo, high intense game. It's not quite the same, would you?
No, yeah, totally agree. And I think it's when we talk about the whys as well, it's understanding the context that we're in and the barriers and what's happening there. And yeah, once we're pulling someone out of a session and that's the case, we've probably got to bear that in mind, that they might not be thinking. But even when we're tired, we can still learn.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of things that, going back to the drinks break, things going off topic a bit, but as coaches, if people look tired, and we have to be careful of health and safety and all them sort of things and the welfare of the player, but sometimes we see them tired and we stop the session, go and get a drink. Well, they're still learning in that session.
Yeah.
So that sort of brings that back to that. So time was something we thought. We found that questions were to groups rather than individuals. We found that within the questions that were being asked, there weren't chance for discussion. It would generally, sort of what we call sort of convergent questions. So more sort of closed questions, if you like.
So like a yes or no response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we found a lot of that. And this wasn't actually in the research, but when in the past studies, when I've actually talked to coaches about questioning, there were no sort of deliberately planning of questions. I'm not saying should be, but maybe that would help. So yeah, questions, there were no time given for thinking, they were given to groups rather than individuals. So yeah, we sort of found that from the coaches. We saw a lot of good practice as well.
Yeah.
So we did see some. Well, I say a lot. We saw some good practice within.
What would some of that good practice have been?
So we sort of saw people setting tasks and getting people into small groups, similar to the drinks break thing that we talked about before.
Yeah.
So when they did go off for drinks, the defenders were given a little task based on the coaching points. The midfielders and the forwards as such, they were given little tasks, and then they come back and they discussed it as a group. And yeah, that's a little bit more time consuming than asking one question, but probably we would argue more beneficial for the long term for learning.
Because I find that, I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with asking the group a question. It could be done for a certain reason.
No.
But you might tend to only get certain respondents.
Exactly, yeah, that, and it's usually the keen ones, isn't it, at the front. And what I always find as well, I see it in coaching a lot, is that when you ask group coaching, there is a fight to get the answer out. You want to be that person, the player wants to be that person to answer the question correctly because it makes them look good. But there's no real thinking, it's just firing out what you think the answer is. And sometimes what I'm finding as well, and I'm guilty for it, is that when we ask questions, we're looking for the answers that we want, and sometimes the players give great answers, like blow your mind answers, do you know what I mean? And it's a far better answer than what I was initially thinking, but we sort of like discredit it, and we're just looking for that answer because we're quite narrow in that way. So it sort of broaden our thinking as well in that sense. And I've learnt loads of stuff from me under 13 players, absolutely loads of things.
Such as?
Well, just things like playing out from the back, and like I want my centre back to be at a position, like a certain angle to receive the ball, and so the first touch can go forward. But that's not always the case for some players. They might do things differently. They might be very, very comfortable at using sort of the outside of the foot to take it forward, if that makes sense. And there's a player I think of in the under-13s who's very good at that, and I'm telling him to open up his body and receive the ball and take it first touch with his inside his foot, because that's the technical model in my brain. But actually he's quite good at confusing centre forwards, twisting his body late and bringing the ball with the outside his foot forward, and he's got that vision to be able to do that. So keep his body closed, so he thinks forwards read that, if that makes sense. So it's from having them sort of discussions where I actually think, well, yeah, actually that's best for you. Yeah. Stick with it, carry on with it, you know what I mean? And how can I help you advance that and improve that?
You mentioned about planning questions. What's some of the processes that you go through now when you're planning? So we've talked about you've got your sessions designed for you already, but how do you think about the questions that you might pose to your players, and in what way?
Again, I keep talking about, I think it's really important to coach individuals and be individualised, but if I'm honest, when I look at the session plan, I look at the coaching points first, and I look at what us as coaches want these players to do.
What's the end game, if you like? Yeah,
and I design the questions based on them. Then I'll start thinking about individuals and I suppose, well, I would have thought we all have it. In my 13s, there's some players who I wouldn't ask that many questions to because they just get miffed off with it. Yeah. They don't like it. So I tell them, fine, great. For me, in my mind, that's what fits them as individuals. Let's think about these individuals and what they need. So I suppose it's tough, but then, like I said earlier, I'd have a piece of paper. I've got these little cards actually that I use, and I just write down the questions, and I have them in my pocket, and I pull them out and I use them and I think about it. Sometimes I've written questions on tactics boards. And something that I've started to use more of recently over the last year, which sort of fits into questioning in some sense, is scenarios. I think that's great. And I never used to use it, but I saw some coaches use it probably only about a year ago. And just little things like, okay, your team's 2-0 down, what are you going to do? If we're working on pressing or whatever we're working on. And I feel that the kids love that. They're playing a game situation. They're in you could label them two different teams in the Premiership, and
there's never a shortage, is there? All you've got to do is watch Match of the Day on a Saturday, and pause the TV and you've got yourself a scenario that you could potentially use.
Yeah.
But I suppose then it's choosing why and for what reason.
Yeah, and that's the important bit. Yeah, for me, the programs are important, and these experts, our head of phases, know what they're doing, and they know what they want the players to have, because they also look at the individuals. And our head of phase is great. He'll look at what the individual needs. He'll base the programs around that. Also, in terms of what the academy requirements are for the EPPP, and it's all based around that. And these programs are great, so it's important to use them as well. But then, being flexible as well.
You mentioned about there's certain players in your care that you have to be selective with if and what type of questions you ask them or pose them. Similar in my own environment. What about if the coach isn't comfortable asking questions? How could you, or what advice could you give to a coach out there that perhaps questioning isn't part of their repertoire yet? How might they start to build it in?
Well, questioning is definitely a skill, and I look back at my questioning still, and last time I filmed myself a couple of months ago, and I look back, and again I'm saying all these things based on, but it doesn't always transfer into practice. It's really tough to do these things, and some of my questions were like, that's terrible, because you can't plan all your questionings. But that'd be my sort of advice: write these down and plan them and have them there and have them structured. And I think it's really tough, but you're trying to get that open question that gets players to think and giving them opportunity to discuss, and then giving them time to do that. And I suppose when I'm coaching, this silence on task is important, that we discussed earlier, is that I'm silent on task. I'm carefully observing what's going on in the session, but I'm also thinking about my next intervention. What is that going to be, and what that question is going to be. I suppose there's nothing wrong with having a pen and paper there and writing it down and spending that time. Like, let them get on with the practice. They're fine. You know what I mean? Yeah.
It's funny that we talk about technology and all this, but actually, good old-fashioned pen and paper can be just as useful.
Yeah, definitely.
It brings me back to even the session I did with the lads last night, and they'd asked for a drinks break, and it was a timely point because it gave me an opportunity to set the two teams who were playing against each other some problems via questions. And I remember a former colleague of ours who wrote our module 3 of the Youth Award, John Allpress, and I used to find it really interesting watching the way he posed questions to players, because he would almost, their natural instinct was to answer him, but he would ban it back. I don't want to know the answer. The answer's for you to discuss. The question is for you to think, not for me to know the answer.
Brilliant.
And I was working with the boys last night and posed them a question to get them to think about how they might play the game, the condition game, differently. And all I'm doing is eavesdropping, but I found myself getting tense because they drifted off into a different tactical discussion. And with one team, I couldn't help myself but start to ask more questions to try and guide them back where I wanted them to go. But it wasn't actually where they wanted to go. You're caught in that rock and hard place sometimes, aren't you?
Yeah, it's tough. But I suppose people will say now, let them get on with it, and you know what I mean, and they should be able to explore X, Y, and Z. But sometimes I suppose we don't want to make our jobs redundant. That's the problem at the minute. Sometimes we might need to come back to what the focus of the session is for X, Y, and Z. And I think it goes back to that rationalising and understand why we do what we do. And it might be great there that they go off and explore, but actually, okay, we need to move back to this, maybe. And I think that's where we still need to coach, you know what I mean? We're sometimes talking ourselves out of a job, but we're still there to support their learning. We need to support it, don't we?
Yeah, you just got me thinking there actually when you said about you just use the whiteboards as a place to store your questions, and often we will turn up and we'll be working to a theme or a topic. Let's say that theme might be, you mentioned it, playing out from the back. Well, what if we could even flip that on its head and say the theme or tonight's session is, how might we play out from the back? So the session itself becomes a question.
Yeah, yes.
So even just as a starting point, if we were thinking about how could we include more questions in our sessions, having the session topic or title as a question might start to get us into those habits. So that language is really important, and the way that you frame them. And I know that's been some of your work that you've looked at is how the use of language can impact on the coach's thoughts, or even, dare we say it, or coaching philosophy.
Yeah, I suppose this is where my research at the minute comes in with the PhD that I'm doing, is that, I'll be honest, 5 years ago I started off and it come up with question of trying to identify this coaching philosophy. What is it? And I did a lot of reading around it and thought, great, I'm going to go into this football academy, I'm going to go and find it, I'm going to find out what it is, and I'm going to present that in some research. And it got so bitty and it got so more complex than that as I moved through the research process. And even as academics, reading academics' work of coaching philosophy, no one really understands what it is. There's no sort of clear definitions about it. And the actual term coaching philosophy doesn't really mean anything. Philosophy of coaching maybe means something, but coaching philosophy doesn't really mean anything. But then it's interesting, I found a clip years ago of philosophers talking about philosophy, and they come up with lots of different answers themselves. So the term philosophy is tricky. But I think what I've sort of found in my PhD is that coaching philosophy is a bit of a buzzword, and there's many others in coaching, a hell of a lot of others, but coaching philosophy is a bit of a buzzword which actually means nothing, and is actually quite dangerous for practice, and is something that we just use to cover things up sometimes. So and we hear it on the media a lot, that this is my coaching philosophy, this is that, my coaching philosophy today, we didn't play to our coaching philosophy. All these sort of, the media and other coaches using it sort of then means we sort of reproduce that. These coaches in high levels, the England managers using terms, I'm not saying the current England manager, but past England managers have used the term coaching philosophy. Well, we should be using it, but we don't actually understand what it is, we don't understand what it means. It comes back to this why and rationalising and understanding. So I see coaching philosophy currently as a bit of a buzzword that's used, and generally, which is worrying for me, is that when we use coaching philosophy, it links more so, not all the time, but links more to a playing style. So, I don't know, playing up and back, rotation of midfielders. So we talk about coaching philosophy and then we talk about that. We never really get into talking about coaching. We never get talking about learning.
We talk about the process, rather than the actual method of or style of play.
Yeah. And for me, it'd be more worthwhile to talk about coaching and learning and them sort of things. And for the last couple of years, actually, within my role as a lecturer with a first year undergraduate module, which is about theory and practice and coaching theory, we sort of make a pact, students and myself, about not using the term coaching philosophy. Can't use it, can't say it like that. And we have a bit of a joke about it. Constraint. Like I said, like we were talking about before, the coach-led constraint approach. But basically, it's interesting. What I found just over 2 years is that you end up talking about coaching. You end up talking about learning and why you do why you've chosen that method or why you've done this. It was quite interesting. Instead of saying, "Oh, it's because of my coaching philosophy," or "I do that because of my coaching philosophy," it actually gets some discussions going about learning, about coaching, about why we do about this, about practice, about the behaviours, if you like, that we use. And I found it quite useful, because I think we have to be careful of the language we use without fully understanding what it means, or saying things that we're doing and then not actually doing it in practice. Like the others, like athlete-centred. That's another, for me, a buzzword that is used a lot in coaching without real clear understanding of what that is and how that helps players and develops players.
So what does that mean to you?
Good question.
Well, how might that?
Well, I suppose athlete-centred, it's sort of viewed now as giving them the ownership, isn't it, and them sort of things. But I think we have to be careful of that, because sometimes coaches can take that as, set up a game, leave them to it. That's good coaching, that's athlete-centred. It's not really, to me, what athlete-centred is. I suppose it's giving them ownership and the focus around them and some of the things we've discussed earlier in the podcast, but yeah, it's so much more. And sometimes these words actually mean nothing in some ways. And I'm still in the process of currently writing it up, but yeah, it started off, let's go out and find this coaching philosophy. Well, what actually is it? And it's more a buzzword that is used in coaching that actually means nothing.
Generally, would you say? I mean, we've had a few discussions with other people on the podcast, and I think Professor Dave Richardson and John Moores would probably lean towards you in agreement there. We've had Don Vincent and Andy Cale who have said something similar, but see it more of a way of just articulating why you're doing what you're doing. My own experiences are, it's just for me a filter, a lens from which I can view the problems that come at me, of which everyone is pretty much unique. We might be face similar problems, but you never really face the same problem. But it gives me a guide from which I might make a more rational decision.
Yeah, but the term coaching philosophy doesn't actually mean that.
Yeah.
That's the case. And what I'm finding with coaches is that they're using it, and it's not really linking to their actual values and beliefs and X, Y, and Z, and these things that we say like athlete-centred don't actually underpin our coaching.
No.
And for example, for me, understanding learning would be quite important for a coach. It's what we do. But when you ask coaches what learning is, we come up with lots of different definitions, and we don't clearly understand what learning is, and that is problematic for in my mind. If we're looking to develop and we want players to learn, then surely we need to understand what that is. So yeah, it's sort of been the shift there of coaching philosophy to sort of playing style. It's not really about coaching or learning, but yeah, I'm still writing it up. So, but it's tricky. It has been tricky, and I think that's where the link comes to when I talk about. I feel why is really important. To be honest, for me, I found it really useful, like I've said, with the undergrads the first year, just get rid of the term. Let's just stop using the term coaching philosophy and actually talk about our beliefs of coaching then, and then trying to make sure that matches what we do, instead of just dropping out these buzzwords that mean nothing.
So I suppose that goes full circle to almost where we started, where you're talking about, well, if you can get coaches to really start to think about what are their beliefs, what do they believe to be true, and then how do you then measure your own performance? Isn't a great word, I don't think, but how do you measure yourself as a coach against what your own beliefs are? So in other words, I suppose, in short, are you practicing what you preach?
Yeah. And I think that's a good place to start. What are you actually doing when you coach? And I think that's the place to start. So what are you doing? And then sort of understanding, well, why are you doing that? And then just from that process itself, you might start changing reasons why you do it. And then, for example, I don't know, the buzz thing at the minute is questioning, isn't it? Like, we should be questioning. Well, go and find out and understand why we should be questioning, and why is questioning a good tool to use based on the player's needs and learning. And then from that, you can make a more informed, rationalised decision on using it, and when to use it, and when best fits practice, individuals, groups, etc. But it's not. I find coaching very tough. Like, it's not easy, and I think that's why we all enjoy it in some ways. If it was that easy and you could just get given one piece of paper and this is coaching, this is what you do. And to be fair, you could possibly do that, and you could take that and you could just deliver that, but it wouldn't be coaching, would it? It wouldn't be what we feel is best for players' needs.
No, it definitely keeps me awake at night, and it goes back to that. The more you uncover, the more you know, the more you realise that you don't know.
Definitely, yeah. We are always learning, and that's what's great about it for me. Yeah.
So if coaches were, if they wanted to think more about their own, and I won't use the term philosophy, but if they wanted to think more about
what they do in their practice,
how might
they do it,
how might they go about that?
Again, I suppose it comes back round to sort of this video, what we were talking about. I think that's a great tool to sort of film yourself, and then if you can, get into some reflective conversations about that, and starting firstly understand why you do what you do, and then it's, I suppose, building blocks from there that best suit you. You might find I understand that and I'm very good at this area, not so much this area. Well, let's go and have a look how you can improve that. And at the minute there's lots of stuff out there that you can do, isn't there? There's lots of courses the FA provide, there's lots of stuff you can do educational wise, and there's lots of stuff on the internet. And I suppose the next step for that, and one thing that really does bug me and leads back to that culture and tradition and the impact of that on us, is that let's be critical about what we read, what we see, and then also what we do. There's loads of stuff on the internet which is great, some of it is garbage, so let's be critical of that. And it's actually reading it and then thinking about it and going, well, does that actually fit for my practice sometimes, or I'm not sure. Having conversations are really important. There's stuff out there recently about like online communities and talking to groups and critical friends, the language that we used before, they're really beneficial.
It's interesting now, you mentioned how available information is now, and we've got, which I'm sure many of the listeners will be involved in, with a company called Hive Learning. Okay. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's almost like a social media type platform for coaches and coach learning and development.
Nice.
And we have a FA coaching community on there, and the discussions that are going on, and from people who perhaps would never have been connected before, but from all corners of the country, now having a discussion around the common problems that they are faced with and some of the methods in which they've tried to overcome those situations.
Great.
And it's fascinating and inspiring to watch that happening live, because these conversations are now occurring on a daily basis, and it seems as though it's a supportive community where one can go and get help should they need it. I think that's really important.
Definitely, yeah. And it's what I do all the time, to be honest. I'll ring my head of affairs up and have discussions with him. I'll speak to colleagues at the university. I'll speak to my PhD supervisor, and I speak to other colleagues who do work. I feel it's always important to discuss these things through, and they always become clearer through a discussion and construction, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I think that leads back to sort of full circle in terms of this, what we talked about earlier, in terms of these reflective conversations, helping to improve self-awareness, helping for learning and our development. And just talking about coaching, like it's annoying me a lot at the minute when I go to other academies, and even in my own academy, we quite easily, or these are my experiences, quite easily talk about playing style. We'll bang on about X, Y and Z, about, like we said, the same sort of stuff at the minute. Currently playing out from the back, rotation, all this sort of stuff, where we don't really have great in-depth conversations about coaching. I don't know.
And our role in that.
Yeah. And even just talk like this has been great for me. This podcast has been great. You know what I mean? I've learned loads, and it's got me thinking, and I've made notes here. I've jotted lots of things down that make me think about the things we've discussed, and I find this an educational tool.
Absolutely, that's what we're hoping it will be. Yeah, likewise, just speaking to the range of people that we've had on the show has really challenged my thinking and opened my mind up to different ideas. And I think that skill of reflection is something that we as coaches could certainly improve at, and if we do, it can be a real game changer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. For me, let's move from plan, do, review. I know we have, but let's not just plan, do, review and end up regurgitating the same stuff we've done before, because there's no sort of understanding of what you're actually doing, and there's no actual sort of rationalisation. It's just so it's the reflective conversations, the reflections are really important.
So what sort of habits do you build into your own coaching that enable you to have those reflective conversations?
Again, going back to the filming is important. I'm lucky enough to work with an assistant So we have discussions. I'll ask him quite openly. I do ask the players, but I think sometimes you have to be careful about that. They give great feedback. They do give great feedback, but you've got to think about what their feedback is based on. And then I sort of speak to assistant, head of phase, look at the videos. Yeah. So all that sort of stuff is my sort of what I use for my learning. And I say it a lot because I think some people, I suppose, well, I'm the same. It's difficult sometimes to give someone some feedback. Yeah. You don't want to hurt the feelings. It doesn't always have to be negative. A lot of it can be positive, but I suppose there's that natural reaction to go to the negative, and you feel that, it's framing it in the right way. But I just say to the people who give me, I'm thick-skinned, I can take it. Yeah. And at the end of the day, if you don't agree with it, then critically think, rationalise why you do not agree with it. Don't just say I don't agree, I'm not saying. Make sure you rationalise that and think, okay, that is why I don't, and you can do that yourself. And then, but yeah, I've learned loads from doing coaching, but then talking about it. I think that's the key bit, or else I'd just regurgitate the same stuff, because the research out there, we have poor self-awareness as coaches, so highlighting that awareness is really important.
And I think part of the problem is perhaps time, is just having that or creating or protecting time to have that reflection.
Yeah.
One of the things I tried in my many experiments last night was, okay, I live 10 minutes from where I coach, we're on the park, how can I use that drive home? And what I'm not saying is that there's going to be any level of great detailed reflection that might go on immediately on the drive home after a session, but if I can just capture my thoughts somehow, that might act as a platform from which I can reflect more critically and more deeply later on down the line. I know that, I think it was Jenny Moon, whose work I've read, recommends the rule of 10, which is 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days is not a bad model to go on. So 10 minutes to get that immediate emotive response, 10 hours, okay, we've slept on it, now what do we think? 10 days, okay, we've removed myself further from the event, let's really try and make some sense of it all. So just on the drive home last night, I decided to set my phone off, the voice notes recording, turn the radio off, and just dump down everything I was thinking and feeling about the session. So last night, what should have been an hour and a half's drive took me 3 hours, so I was almost half an hour late to coaching. Turned up in a tiz. Some of the boys were having a bit of horseplay, as you'd expect 13-year-olds to do.
Yeah.
And the session didn't go as I was envisaging it when I left to drive there. So I had to take that into consideration, that emotionally I wasn't probably in the right place by the time I got there. What I've found is that the more I've looked into the mirror rather than through the window, the more effective my reflection's been. So what I mean by that is, I'm not just looking at, right, the players did this wrong, or this happened in the session, this worked for the player. Actually looking at myself, or what was my role in that event? How did I help or hinder that process? I think that's maybe something important that we need to do more of.
Definitely, yeah. I think we should definitely look at ourselves first, yeah. And then certainly in terms of our reflections, if it didn't work, well, why it didn't work? I'm sure if it all went well, we'd congratulate ourselves. Yeah. But if it doesn't go too well and we're looking for others to blame, that's, I don't know, is that human nature? I don't know, but yeah, certainly look back at ourselves. And time's an interesting thing. I totally agree. We made the argument with questioning as well, that questioning takes time. Obviously, it's a lot quicker just to tell, but it's important. You know what I mean? Thinking is important for learning, so therefore don't use time as a bit of a cop-out sometimes. And maybe that's something we need to think of with our reflections, is that maybe can we try and find time somewhere? And I know it is very tough. I do a lot of my reflections in the car on the way on, but yeah, finding a block sometime somewhere. And even chats over dinners, and you know what I mean, sometimes you can skew the chats, can't you, in your favour, and start talking about this happened last night at coaching, and it's fine then people who have the same passion for you in coaching, I'm sure they'd love to talk about it, but it's tough.
Yeah, I think the more we can encourage coaches to actually think about that and take the time out to reflect, the better potentially those coaches who are more effective and more that they're going to be able to help the players in their care.
Yeah, definitely. And that was one of the main things from one of the research lines that we did, is that the reflective conversation, the interviews that we had ended up reflective conversations, and it was sort of an accidental intervention that they found like really useful. And
this was going back to your coach behaviour.
Yeah, and the coach behaviour stuff. And when we looked at, well, these behaviours changed, why did they? They found the actual interviews when we were just talking about why they did what they did as like a bit of a catalyst for learning, and they found that really important.
Yeah. Great, Mark. Well, what I want to do is move on and ask some questions that we've been asking to regular guests. Is there anything else that we kind of mapped out that we haven't discussed yet that you want to bring up before we do that, though?
No, I think we discussed quite a bit.
Great stuff. Okay, so we asked Twitter and the coaches out there what sort of questions would they like to hear from regular guests, or what regular questions would they like to hear from the guests. And one of those was, what's the best investment that you've made in yourself as a coach?
It might sound like a political answer, but working at a university, but I've sort of found doing my masters especially really, because I suppose what I've talked about for the last, or what we've discussed, links to it, and I think it's really important that we rationalise and we understand and we underpin why we do what we do, and having that understanding helps me to make informed decisions when I coach, and to me that's really important. And I've got a lot of them sort of underpinnings, if you like, or started with them underpinnings through my masters, and started to understand some of the theory to why I do what I do. So yeah, my masters are quite important for me. Working with colleagues within the football academy I work with, certainly learnt a lot with them. So I think in terms of best investment, money wise, probably my masters, yeah. But then time as well, just talking to others. And these are like, to be fair, I talk to anyone about coaching, anyone who I can bore, anyone who wants,
it's an obsession.
Anyone who wants to speak to me. And we have chats, certainly within the academy with other coaches, colleagues at where I work. I'm lucky to be in that environment. So yeah, I suppose biggest investment, masters, and then time, spending time talking to people about coaching. I think that's important.
Great. What have you changed your mind about?
What I've changed my mind about, I've tried to do in my coaching, is probably be a bit more individual based, which is tricky, but pulling out individuals and working with individuals more than the group as a whole, and that's something I've sort of changed within my coaching. A lot of my coaching at the start was, this one size fits all, you're all going to get it as such, and these are what you need to learn as a group. Now it's a little bit more individualised. Players learn, especially under 13s, there's a wide range of where they're at the moment and potential and etc. So trying to take my coaching more individualised. So I've certainly a shift to more game based, not just because of the learning, because there's not a great deal of evidence out there to suggest why, but more for motivational factors, maybe enjoyment factors, and from my experience and seeing how kids react in the two situations, gone more game based, gone more questioning, still using feedback, still using command, still using isolated practice, but probably more so what I'd call like playing form activities, and then obviously the individualised coaching. And
lastly, what have you seen or read recently that's had an impact on your way of thinking or your coaching?
I really like watching documentaries, and there's not many out there in other sports. So you seem to, and it'd be really good if they're doing one at the minute with the current rugby union Lions team. There's two in the past that I've got on DVD. I really enjoy watching.
Living with Lions, was it?
Yeah. And there's an England one as well with Clive Woodward. But yeah, recently, anyway, the latest Lions one, not the current Lions team that are out there in New Zealand, I watched that the other day, and I just found that really interesting. And I think, again, linking back to what we've discussed in the past, it's not always about because they are the elite and because they're apparently the best of the best, these coaches and you can observe their sessions on this documentary that I watched. And you can take a lot of good things from their practice, and there's great, but also being critical and thinking, well, no, that actually won't work for me. And then starting to think also while you're watching it, well, why are they using that? How do you rationalise that? And that's difficult, but yeah, I've watched quite a few of them documentaries now from other sports.
Is it just the rugby or?
Yeah, I've struggled to find others. Rugby union seem to be a bit more open door. Maybe that's because I'm looking out for them because I enjoy watching rugby union. But yeah, I think we're a closed shop in football. I don't really see many of them behind the scene football documentaries. I might be wrong. But yeah, if anyone else can recommend any other documentaries, get a few out there. That's brilliant. So yeah, and I suppose this is the most recent. I've learnt loads from this. Will certainly have an impact on me, the way I think about my research, my PhD, but also how I coach as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. That seems like a good place to wrap things up. Anything else that you want to get out there or get off your chest, Mark, before we finish?
It is a bit of a counselling session, this. Just thank you for your time, Jack, and thank you for discussing. It's been great.
Quite the opposite, Mark. Thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate your time, and I'll have to get you on again soon for another episode. Cheers.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please help spread the word or leave us a review on iTunes. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. You can reach me on Twitter @JackWalton1, and don't forget to follow Liverpool FA @Liverpool_CFA. See you next time.